You're listening to the Ballet Piano Podcast, lifting the lid on dance accompaniment.
Hello, podcast fans. Welcome to this episode of the Ballet Piano Podcast. I'm Matt Gregory, and I'm here with Chris Hobson.
Hello, listeners.
Now, today's episode is a really good one, isn't it, Chris?
It's going to be fantastic.
We've got ballet royalty.
Living legend.
Yeah, we've got John Sweeney for an In Conversation. Woohoo!
Woo.
John, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
You say that now.
Yeah, so, I mean, let's talk about your life and career. You've been in London for how many years? When did you start playing for class in London?
Ooh, about 1983, I think.
Oh, 83.
Yeah.
I saw 1990 on the internet, but 1983, wow. That's amazing.
So you've seen the scene in London change over nearly 40 years.
I mean, I was very lucky in that I arrived the same time. I mean, only a year or two after Cats had opened. There was this whole dance craze, and everybody was at Pineapple doing classes wearing leg warmers and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There was that whole kind of scene, which meant I think there was a big explosion, and it meant there were more classes happening, I think, than possibly had been happening before.
Yeah. Can we just go back before that to your time in New Zealand and then what brought you to the UK? Was that the year you landed in the UK in 1983?
Yeah.
Okay. And what had happened before that in terms of your training as a pianist?
Well, I was kind of self-taught.
Wow.
And then when I was 17, I went to a wonderful teacher, Ivan Wirapa, and I had to go back to doing 5-finger exercises for about 6 months because I was doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
And then I only studied with him for a year, and that's the only piano training
Formal
I've had.
training.
But I'd always liked improvising, and so how I started in the dance world was completely random in that I had no work. I ran into a fellow musician friend who said they were playing for some kids' dance classes and did I want to do it? And I was happy to do anything, actually.
At 17 years old?
Well, no, this was more when I was 19 or 20, I think. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And it wasn't ballet. It was what I suppose what I would call European contemporary.
Right.
The woman Shona McTavish, who I think there was a company which came over from Austria just before the Second World War, and the Second World War broke out, and they were stuck in Australia and New Zealand, and I think she was one of those.
Right. Okay.
And I was very lucky. She was very musical, and it was a lot of improvisation. I mean, both not just in terms of in terms of me playing, but also in terms of the class itself. And there wasn't anyone else to do it, so she was willing to put up with me not knowing what I was doing, Which I do always. I feel worried for people in London who want to get into playing for dance classes because people are used to people who are experienced.
Yeah, and know the craft.
Yeah, and it's hard. I was lucky both in Australia and in both in New Zealand and in Australia in that I was playing in situations where there was hardly anyone else doing it.
Yeah.
So I kind of learnt, and people were happy to have me.
I think we've all have to be grateful for those teachers. I can name a couple where they let you make your mistakes in the class. Because you'll learn by doing, really.
Yeah, I remember going into classes and not having a clue what I was doing and thinking, hopefully it will be okay. And it was just for the guidance of the teachers actually that got me through it. I'm sure they went into a staff room afterwards and slagged me off royally, and I'll never make it. But it was because of those formulative experiences that you learn your craft, isn't it? Yes. Learn how to do what we do.
And when you started playing for class, did you know the structure of a ballet class, the names of steps and the order of things? Well,
no, I mean, not at all. I mean, my only experience of ballet, I remember when I was at school, we got taken off to see the ballet, and I thought it was unbelievably boring, and I thought I never want to have anything to do with this world in my life. But then actually, I started off playing in Dunedin, New Zealand for contemporary, and then I moved to Auckland, and I started playing for Lim's dance company there, who were teaching contemporary classes, but they were also doing ballet with Dorothea Ashbridge, who had been at Dancer with the Royal Ballet, and she was very much the sort of grande dame, with a a lit cigarette teaching class.
What
all
you
this
imagine
sort
a
of stuff.
dancer was in the days.
Well, it was very, and she was great, and she was very, very helpful, very slightly intimidating. I remember she used to say to me before an exercise, "Now, John, not too slow, but not too fast either."
That's a phrase that goes the whole
Yeah.
world around. Like
The
my
two
old music
tempos.
director, John Paris Jones, he'd walk into rehearsals at Northern. He's like, "How do you want it today, dancers? Too fast or too slow?" Everybody uses it. It's brilliant, but it's so appropriate.
So your way into playing for dance was through improvisation.
Yeah. And I always, I mean, it's kind of weird now because I have mainly ended up playing for ballet now.
Yeah.
But I always thought of myself as a contemporary pianist who played for ballet.
Right.
Because actually through most of my life, I've probably played for more contemporary than ballet in a way. And for many different teachers. Like, then I went to Australia and I worked with Australian Dance Theatre where I was playing for quite a lot of contemporary, and it was my introduction to Graham classes and things like that.
And I know in London as well, I think everyone's desperate for you to play contemporary because you are probably the best at it.
Well, no, I mean, what's happened now, I feel, is that I'm you know, there are so many fantastic. I hear at London Contemporary School so many fantastic people playing for contemporary, often doing things with tape loops and things like that.
Yeah.
And I feel very kind of old school in a way in terms of that. And so I'm you know, even when I work a bit at London Contemporary School, I'm mainly playing for ballet.
I understand what you mean, because I started off at Northern School of Contemporary Dance as, you know, there were two camps. There was either percussionists or pianists, and I was obviously one of the pianists. But now you go in there and you've got, it's like pianists who will bring in loop tapes, you'll bring in this, all this amazing equipment and stuff like that. And I feel like a dinosaur now, because it's just like I don't know how it works, and I don't know what to do with it. And so I remember you know, I mean, for me, the basic struggle, especially, you know, for stuff like Graham and these, I was understanding the counts and remembering everything, knowing what the order of the exercises were, and, you know, like having a random 8 or a 6 in between. I mean, like not going to different sides, but, like, you know, the breathing space in between and things. Yeah. And like really trying to focus on that. Yeah, I don't. It's really dinosaur-y.
So yeah, you get to London in 1983. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so, what brought you here, and how did you start working in London?
Well, I came over with some friends, one of whom was English. We were living in Australia together, and they were coming back to England. New Zealanders, certainly at that time, and I think possibly still, you know, you always want to go do your OE, your overseas experience.
Yeah.
I'd spent, you know, you've got to remember this is pre-internet times.
Yeah.
Musical life in New Zealand was very isolated. I, at the time, was very interested in contemporary music and also in early music, which there wasn't a lot of either happening in New Zealand, where I could see there was loads of it happening in London.
Yeah.
And when I came to London, I was like a kid in a sweet shop. I just went to so many concerts and things like that. It was just amazing. I mean, that is one of the... I slightly feel, you know, when I look at my kids, that they've got everything around them.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I feel like I was lucky and not to have everything around me. So I really appreciated it when I came and all the things which were available here. So that's basically why I came.
Yeah. And how old were you when you landed in London?
About 24, 25, something like that.
Yeah. And then when did you meet Anna Duboisson? Because we'll get onto that relationship, because that's been a long relationship, hasn't it?
Yeah.
That's like longer than most marriages. Like,
It's longer than my marriage.
it must be nearly 40 years
Getting
now.
on for that, yeah. Yeah, that's probably about 37, yeah.
Yeah. Because she taught at Pineapple first, set Pineapple up, then set up Danceworks, which are the two big studios in London.
Yeah.
Well, early in the 80s as well. So that's probably when that whole scene was happening, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, what happened, I mean, I was mainly playing at the place, and I was playing for lots of contemporary classes, particularly. I had someone gave me Judith Knight, who was the head musician at the place's phone number when I was in Australia, because they had connections with the place. So I rang up her, and I gradually got some work. But then I discovered that it was, you know, because it was all school stuff. So when the holidays happened, I had no work and no money, and I thought I need to find other work which goes all the year round. And I don't know how I'd first played for Anna. I played for her for something, but then she moved to. I played a couple of times, I think, for her at Pineapple. Then she moved to Dance Works, and she rang me up and said, "Do you want to come and play?" So I was able to, because of the times when the classes where I was able to do that and do the plays at the same time.
Yeah.
So that was probably about 1985, 86, I think.
Wasn't that the year we were born, Chris?
I was born in 86.
I was born in 85.
You young ones, you.
And when you started playing for classes, did you ever feel like out of your depth, or were you still finding your feet at that point, or were you as assured as you are now? I know you never stopped. I know you never stopped learning, but
I mean, it depends what you're talking about. I mean, I found when I was playing for proper Graham classes at the place, that was. I often felt I didn't know what I was doing, and I kind of gradually got competent with that. Then I had this wonderful teacher, Viola Farber, who was a founder member of the Cunningham Company, came over and taught classes which were kind of Cunningham-based, if you like. She would say they're not Cunningham, but her own thing. Yeah. And I remember I was playing very Graham-type music for her class at one point, and she turned to me and she said, "Can you just play something which doesn't sound like modern dance music? Right. Play anything." And it was like someone slapped me in the face, but it was really useful. It opened up a whole possibility, and I realised I could play all sorts of stuff for class. Yeah. And she was, of course, she also played the piano very well. She was open, she was very musical, and she was very open to me doing all sorts of weird things in class. Yeah. In terms of playing for ballet, I remember some of the Russian teachers I had to play for, where I had no idea what I was doing or what the tempo was. And you may have all experienced the thing where they go 1, 2, 3, and you got no idea. Yeah. And so I found played for a few open classes for people like Madame Messerer and so forth. But I didn't enjoy it much, and I didn't find it. I suspect they probably didn't enjoy my playing much either.
I mean, there was one I was saying to Akiko, it was a few years ago. We were working together somewhere in Europe, let's say, so it's not litigious, and with a Russian ballet mistress, and she says, "Oh, we're going to do the Sleeping Beauty." The male variation, yum, ba, da, dum, bum. So, but we will do the original female choreography. So step, leg up, down, step, leg up, down. I was like, okay. So I started playing. No, maestro, slower. So I bitched about this for 10 days, and then we got to this sort of general rehearsal for this performance, and it starts off, yum, bum, 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 yum, ba-dum. And I was like, and then from the back of this auditorium, I goes, "Slower, maestro!" And then I just looked at Akiko. I was like, "I told you I wasn't lying. This has killed my soul."
That was happens, doesn't it?
Yes, it was that, Matt.
So you've never really played tunes for class?
No, for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, that wasn't what interested me. What interested me was actually, and it still is what interests me, is one of the things that interests me is how I can use class to develop ideas and develop my improvisation and things like that. Also, I've heard people massacring Chopin mazurkas for class. And I do sometimes feel like that should be a capital offence at times. So, because it's very rare. I mean, some people have got it down and they've got all the right music and it all fits for exercises, and that's fine. But often it's not the case that the music has to be butchered to make it fit what people are doing. And the other reason is that actually, I mean, I'd go crazy if I played the same music over and over again. And I've seen a number of dance musicians go crazy. Yeah. And also, for the people who are doing it, if you get the same music for a bat more tendu every day, people aren't going to hear the music anymore. And they're also not going to get stretched or have any kind of different sensation, even in their muscles, from how the music affects the movement. Yeah. But I mean, that's all a kind of explanation. Basically, the main thing is the selfish reason, but I just want to use class so that it's something of use to me. If it's not of use to me, apart from earning a living, then it gets really boring. And if you can make it something which is alive for you, then I think it also tends to be alive for the people in class, and you don't go crazy.
Yeah, that's a really nice approach for that, because I don't want to go into a class and play stuff that I don't like. It's like if I'm asked to do something that I don't agree with, of course I will do it, but I will not enjoy it. I want to go into class and I want to make it the best experience for me and for the dancers and the teachers who are in that room at that time. It's like, because we're all in there for 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it is. Company class, it's 75 minutes. It's got to be the most, because the recipe is the same, isn't it? The exercise, relatively, the
Certainly
basic
ballet,
recipe is still the same. Yeah.
yeah.
You've got to make it. You've got to make it interesting. You've got to make it enjoyable. You've got to make it challenging almost for yourself.
And I mean, I don't mind if teachers turn around and say, "Can we have something different?" I don't like that. I mean, if they do it for just about every exercise, then I think, well, maybe they should get someone different.
I was the wrong box. I was the wrong booker, sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm perfectly open to people wanting something different, or even challenging me, saying, could you play something like, I don't know, giving me a completely different sense of what I would have thought of that exercise. That's kind of interesting. And that tends to happen. I mean, I guess that tends to happen more in contemporary classes, I feel. More. I mean, with ballet, particularly with the bar, because it's so set. I mean, my big problem I find with class is, say someone sets a rondejouan, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't want to play something which sounds like what I normally play for rondejouan, but it's very, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's once you get something ingrained, it's very hard to get out of it.
Especially like with bar as well. You've got the freedom to do whatever you want, but you are constrained by these rules that are set, usually by a teacher's experience, isn't it? Because like you say, like a rondejouan, it's usually it's like a languid, very slow 3/4 waltz. Yeah. So how do you make that interesting day in, day out?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of, I mean, you've obviously got to do something which works. It's no good just playing what you like and it doesn't fit the dance. It's got to work for the dance. But I always feel happy when particularly exercises like that, I find something which feels, I mean, I don't know how it feels to the dancer, but to me it feels new. Whether it's in terms of a different sort of timing, but which still works, or whether it's just in terms of the musical language I'm using or
a texture or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But I was going to say, when you see a dancer then respond in a different way, does that sort of give you the feedback that you want? You go, okay, I achieved what I wanted to achieve from this exercise. Because I know that when I'm playing stuff, if I want to try and evoke a particular emotion, either with something that's, that I've butchered or something that's improvised, I've got the odd few dancers in the studio that I know that are good and musical and that are on it, and I'll watch them and see what their sort of physical response is to what I'm playing. So do you do that, or do you just go, I think that worked? How do you?
No, I'm watching.
How do you get
I'm
like
watching
your
the dancers
feedback
watching the dancers most of the time, and hopefully I've got some idea of whether it's working for them or not. I mean, of course, I've never been a dancer. I've never trained in ballet, so it's always me looking from the outside looking in terms of that. And I suppose I kind of rely also on the teacher if the teacher thinks it doesn't work. Yeah,
or the teacher can then validate that because they think, that's perfect for what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice feeling when you can change the whole atmosphere in a dance class by what you play. You can just suddenly surprise people, and then if people go with it, and of course it also depends on the level which you're playing for, in terms of how much you feel people are able to respond to something which they're not expecting. And you've got to, you kind of got to calibrate that and judge that depending on the situation. But it is a wonderful feeling particularly when you feel people are all kind of down and not really there, and you play something, and then suddenly you feel that people have.
Everybody comes together.
And they've all it's come alive.
I did a class once at Danceworks, and you were playing for it. I think it might have been one of the 3 o'clocks, the old 3 o'clocks. Yeah. And then I went upstairs at 4:30. And there's something about your music, John. It's like it gets in your body. It's so... Yeah. And then when you're doing your bar work, it's like that music is making you execute your technique. And then when I went, I didn't do the Grand Allegro, quickly changed, and then I went and played 4:30. Then I suddenly was playing like I had 6 hands because I was so pumped from being in the studio downstairs with you playing. It must have been a Tuesday when you did 3 o'clock and I did 4:30, Christina. Yeah. I just remember feeling, wow, Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And dancers must tell you that all the time.
Yeah.
Because you can feel the energy from your playing, like down the stairs, like out the building.
I mean, I tell you, this gets all a bit kind of philosophical, but one thing I do love about playing for class is that there are a whole lot of people, particularly with open classes, there are a whole lot of people in the room. You probably don't agree with a lot of people's politics, or you wouldn't have anything to say to them in normal life.
Yeah.
But you are sharing this experience in a studio, and it is a kind of communal experience that when it works really well, and you can feel the energy. I'm just speaking actually, Viola Farber, the teacher I was talking about.
Yeah, I've got her name written down here.
I remember reading an interview with her, which really resonated with me. She was a choreographer, but she said, in this interview, she said, I'm not really interested in choreography anymore. What I just love is the feeling of energy when you get people travelling across the room from one corner to the other. And, there's that sort of feeling when you all kind of get involved in it.
Yeah.
And as I say, you may have all different views on life or have all different life situations, but you're all sharing something together.
Yeah.
And that's, I also play for silent film, and that's one thing I feel very much can happen when it really works in a silent film, in a live silent film screening as well. That same sort of sense of it being a communal thing you've all experienced. And now we're all so used to experiencing stuff on computers, all separate in our little apartments and so forth. That's a really precious thing. That
when you're
sharing.
all together.
Yeah.
I remember I went to the theatre with Akiko and a couple of friends back in, I think it was October 2020, when London just about started. And it was like some musical theatre.
It was Songs for a New World.
It was Songs for a New World at the
Palladium.
You know my life better than I do. Stalker! But it was the band were on stage at the back, and it was relatively it's not an all singing dancing show, is it? Songs for a New World. But when the band came out, everybody stood and clapped, and it was 5 minutes of just people standing and applauding, and everybody had most people had tears in their eyes. I did, and it was just I'd forgotten what it was like to have, after having 6 months of it being denied, this experience of being there together and experiencing something on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only positive thing we can take out of this whole kind of COVID experience is possibly it's made us realise how valuable certain things are when you only realise when it's taken away.
Yeah.
I
mean, what was Fatima trained as a ballerina, but maybe she could go and live her life in tech or something like that. I was like, hang on a minute. Everybody in 2020 binge Netflix, Sky Arts, this and that. And I was like, without the creative, sweetheart, this would not exist.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of people saying that at the time, all these things you're enjoying or keeping you sane during lockdown, they're all from people who actually often have lost their jobs and have no work at the moment, and aren't being covered by the government's furlough scheme.
If you're enjoying this episode, then why not visit the website balletpianopodcast.com and join the mailing list. You can access past episodes, transcripts, music playlists, and so much more. It will ensure you never miss new episodes or updates. That's balletpianopodcast.com.
So, can we talk about you and improvising? Because you're so good at it. Did you said it came naturally when you were learning, when you were young, but did you train, or was there anyone that influenced you, and how did you become amazing at improvising?
Well,
how did you become the legend that you are now, John? Not to put you on the spot in any way, shape, or form.
I'm glad you asked that question. I don't. Well, I mean, I just started improvising, and I can't play jazz. I'm not from a jazz background. I'm completely from a classical background. But I started improvising. Then, when I was at university, I got very interested in Schenkerian analysis.
Right.
Which was the first form of musical analysis which actually explained to me how Western classical music actually functioned in terms of harmony. And the basis of Schenkerian analysis is 16th century counterpoint. And there's a whole series of exercises you do starting in first species where you have a cantus firmus and you write one note against each note. And the second species, you write 2 notes against that note. You can have a passing dissonance there.
Yeah.
Third species, you do 4 notes, but you can have neighbour notes there. Fourth species, you do suspensions. And fifth species, you combine them all. You've now learned all the forms of dissonance and consonance in Western classical music. And so I did this for a bit, and that I already had been improvising, but that really gave me a structural framework, particularly if I'm improvising in a style which should sound like, say, Western classical music up until about 1900, because it was all based on that, and everybody studied these exercises.
Yeah.
So I've always thought of it very horizontally in terms of lines. I mean, obviously I'm aware that I'm playing a B-flat major chord or whatever, but where it goes is all to do with at the simplest level, it's to do with the bass and the top line, and that was where the chords come from. It's not like I'm thinking I'm going to be in B-flat now, and then I'm going to E-flat major, and then I'm going to, whatever.
So you don't think in chord progressions?
Not much. I mean, very occasionally I do for certain things, but basically I'm not thinking. The chords come from where the lines want to go. So it's kind of, and I'm wondering, given the fact that people do seem to like what I play and they do seem to think it's useful for dance, I'm wondering if that is why, in that, because I'm thinking of of sustaining a line rather than thinking vertically of a chord, and particularly with ballet, it's very much with also with sustaining a line and actually something within time rather than just that you are in a position. It's how you're getting from one thing to another, and that's very much what I'm dealing with musically.
So when a teacher sets an exercise, let's say it's just a tondo at the bar, what's going through your head when a teacher's marking that exercise?
I suppose first of all, is this the tempo which they wanted at?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky now in that most of the teachers I play for either mark at the right speed, or I know that they don't, but I know how to figure
you know
out
them well enough to
work out what the right speed probably is.
I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, do you have ideas for improvisations in your head when a teacher is setting an exercise?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will. Other times, when I start the exercise, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I've now, for quite a long time, I've got to the stage where I don't worry about that. And
you've enough in your bag to get yourself out of jail, essentially.
It doesn't feel like that. I don't. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I do. Some things do sound repetitive, and I'm playing something which is very similar to what I played last week or whatever. But I'm not really thinking like that. But and sometimes when I do with ballet, when I do an introduction, I will try and force myself to think of something different by playing an introduction with chords or lines which I wouldn't normally choose, and then that forces me to find a way. Then it's a spark which gives you something. But I mean, quite often I'm starting an exercise having no idea what I'm going to do. Actually, sometimes I do.
Doesn't that get a bit scary?
It normally works. I mean, sometimes you do something and think, "God, that was terrible." That didn't make any sense.
You might think that, but I don't think the dancer and teacher would think that.
Yeah, but we all do that. But I was just thinking, it was interesting what you said about the introductions, because I was thinking this week, I'm bored of this, and I hadn't realised that I'd associated a particular sort of repertoire of music with very similar introductions. It was only when I played it, I was like, this is, I mean, it's functional, but it was not inspiring. And actually, thinking about saying that, use the introduction as almost like a springboard.
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes.
like for example, today I can actually remember an introduction I played, and I saw this exercise. I thought, I have got no idea what I want to do. So I did an introduction. It was for a Batmore something exercise, quite fast. I can't remember what it was. It might have been Glissé or something. But I just did in the bass. I went in quavers. I went C, E flat, B, F, do like that, and that then gave me a musical language for what came next.
Yeah.
But when I set it off, I had no idea that it would, or what the musical language was, but it actually gave me something. So and I don't think I've ever played that before as an introduction.
Yeah.
And it meant that I did play something which to me anyway, felt different from something I'd played for that exercise before.
So when the teacher's setting the exercise, and I mean, this is a sweeping generalization, but a lot of teachers will set an exercise in a relatively similar way, in and out, and in, or whatever. But what are you thinking there? Are you listening to what they're saying and then listening to how that will influence your ideas of what you're going to play?
Well, in terms of doing...
Or what you're picking up, like accents?
And accents, very much in terms of making something which will actually work with for the dancers. That's where teachers who mark with no expression in their voices are hard to play for. Whereas if someone gives you actually a kind of dynamic shape, or even where the accent is, it's an and, or it's on the one, or whatever, then that gives you something. You don't necessarily have to do that, but then it's kind of clear what you're dealing with. And so you can play around that. You can either play that or you can play around it, but in a way which works with it. So I actually do tend to listen to the teachers. I even listen to the teachers when they give corrections.
Right.
which I mean, I know it sounds stupid.
I go on Amazon when they do that.
No, because it's useful. Because also you've played something, and then you can. It may actually be a correction. You may realise that they're not doing it very well because you're actually not, or you're confusing them, or you're not giving them the right things, or that you could actually be. I remember another phrase Viola said to me once. She said, "Maybe you could be a good influence."
Maybe that's the thing. Ballet pianists could be influencers now. With all this 21st century rubbish.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So do you have any sort of go-to improvisations? I know you say you don't like repeating yourself, but like for muscle memory, is there anywhere that your fingers just go there?
I bet they do.
Yeah.
But I'm not conscious of it, and basically. I generally, if I tend to do anything which I think is interesting, it's a bit like a dream. It's sort of gone. I can't remember it at all.
Wow.
So I'm not conscious of that, but I'm sure it's the case because often you're playing for class and you kind of zone out a bit while you're doing it. But the music seems to be keeping on going without you consciously doing anything particularly.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there is that there as well.
Do you ever record yourself when you're playing and then listen back to it?
I did for a little while, actually.
Because I did it for a bit and then I was like, oh, that might have been interesting when I was doing some of the contemporary stuff. And then, I don't know, it wasn't a conscious decision. I just didn't take a dictaphone to work with me one day and I just never did it again.
I did that for a little while and was it interesting? Possibly it was interesting. I was quite impressed, actually, to be honest. I mean, other times when I've recorded stuff for CDs for playing for ballet class, I've actually hated everything I've done. But when I recorded myself in a real live class situation, and maybe it's because of the echoey acoustic and the not so good audio quality, I thought it sounded interesting.
But then it's also because it's live then, isn't it? I think
that's the thing.
There's a different way of because I do the CDs and it's okay, but I do it at home. I'm not in the zone of doing it at the time. Then when you're in there, it's a different. I know that I play differently in the studio to the way that I play at home.
Absolutely, and that's to me is the crucial thing, and that's why I think possibly I stopped recording myself because it wasn't any use. It wasn't like I was listening to the recordings and thinking, "Oh, I can reproduce that," because I know that doesn't work. I've had this getting onto my other world of silent film.
We're going to get onto that. We're getting there very soon.
No. It's this point that I know. Like sometimes you play for the same film quite often. With famous films like Metropolis and so forth. It gets harder and harder to play for them because you can kind of vaguely remember what you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even if it worked the first time, you spending your film trying to remember what you did doesn't work.
Yeah.
You've got to try and forget it and approach it freshly. And it feels to me it's the same situation in class, that actually listening to yourself and then trying to do it again, it doesn't work for me. I mean, it might do for some people, but for me, it just doesn't.
I think I just did it to listen back to what I was playing. I was like, and then almost rating myself. I was like, was it good or was it bad?
Yeah.
Actually, some of it I think was acceptable. Some of it was rubbish.
But of course, the bits which you think are rubbish, of course, they may have been really useful for
Yeah,
the
and then
dancers.
particularly functional for.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because you couldn't see what was happening. At the time.
there are certain exercises, I think, which are really hard to play anything of great interest, like a lot of the men's, jump stuff at the end,
Yeah.
all that sort of double turry type stuff.
Yeah.
Really hard to play something which is musically very interesting.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
And even if you look at the bloody ballets,
Yeah.
the music of those bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all the same. I mean, what do you play? You either play the
Yeah.
Swan Lake Act 3, Siegfried. Is it Siegfried?
Yeah.
Sorry, no, that was.
Which isn't even Tchaikovsky, it's Driga.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Or what is it? A variation of the Two Cavaliers. Ya-da-dum, ba-bum, da-da-dum, da-dum. Or if you're really scraping the barrel, you'll do Giselle. Which one is it? Da-da-dum, ba-dum. Da-da-dum,
yeah.
da-dum. You can scrape it with that just about, and everything, depending on what the repertoire is for
Yeah.
that season. Everyone would look at you and wish you were anybody else.
But I remember. It was actually very useful for me. Peter Jones, who I don't know if you know, who lives in Liverpool now. He used to work at the place a lot. And he said one thing to me. He said, "Not every exercise has to be exceptional." And I
Yeah.
think that's quite a useful thing. You can actually, there's some things you just had to play stuff which works for
Yeah.
what they're trying to
It's
do.
just
We've
gotta be
said
fun.
And
this-
other times
yeah.
you can do something which is inspiring if you
Yeah.
can.
We've said this before. Sometimes teachers just do like a little medicine exercise, like a little couple of steps that are really boring, but it's
Yeah.
medicine for the dancers. And, it's not a full-on shame on, so the music it can just be medicinal music. It can
Yeah,
be
yeah.
functional, very
Yeah.
functional.
But you want to be fantastic all the time. And that's the problem, is that you've got to accept that not everything you do is going to be fantastic.
No.
Like, in the same way that teachers will say when they're going to go onto the stage, or rehearsal directors are going to say, you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, because you're depending on what day of the week it is, where you are in the middle of the time. It's not always going to work, but you've just got to do it
Yeah.
and accept it.
Right, let's get on to the silent movies, because this is one of the other things that you're famed for. How did that happen?
Well, again, it was completely random. I think it's still going on, but Dance Umbrella Festival, which happens, I think it used to be much more of a big deal. But anyway, in about 1990, as part of Dance Umbrella, these very early dance films had been brought over by, I don't think it was the Cinémathèque Française, but it was another organisation in France, were being brought over and being shown as part of Dance Umbrella, and they were being shown at Riverside Cinema. And at the time, the director of the Riverside Cinema, Ed Lewis, rang up Rambert Dance Company and said, who should I get to play for these? And they suggested me, because I was working for them. So I did these. And what was interesting about it was half the program was early Lumiere films, which is basically documentaries. So it was people dancing in Japan and Mexico and all over the world. And the other half was the more dancey of the Georges Méliès films. He was the trip to the moon person, absolute fantasy stuff. Just beautiful stuff. I got two kind of strands of cinema right in my first program.
Wow.
And anyway, Ed liked it so much, he just started programming normal silent films. So I started playing there, and there I could see the films beforehand. I could go along in the morning, and we did them on a Sunday afternoon. I would go in the morning and watch them, and then play for them on Sunday afternoon. God knows what I sounded like. But anyway, I did that, and then I started working at what was then called the National Film Theatre, BFI South Bank. Where normally you couldn't get to see the films beforehand, so you're playing for films blind.
Wow.
So that was, and that was for many years. I mean, basically until the internet came in. Now, I mean, we still sometimes. I mean, last week I played for a film I hadn't seen.
Yeah.
It still happens, but lots of stuff has been digitized. So normally, at least you can read about it on the internet.
Yeah.
So you have more of an idea. But initially, we were spending all our time playing for films, not having seen it, and reacting very quickly to what was happening.
So when you don't know how to play, like your first ballet class, when you play your first film, what are you going to sit down and play? Are you using your improvisations from your ballet class? That's sort of what you do now to, one helps the other.
I'm sure it does help in a way, but I mean, films aren't metrical, whereas ballet classes particularly are.
Yeah.
So you're tending to play in a much less. Sometimes you will be playing in a quite metrical way.
Yeah.
I find because of but half my life I spent playing for ballet class. I have to be very careful that I don't start playing a film as if it is a ballet class and very metrical.
Yeah, eight count phrases.
Because the scene changes something else, and you're stuck in the middle of your 8 count phrase, and it feels awkward.
Yeah.
But so you're more following you're doing all sorts of things when you're playing for a film.
Yeah.
A silent film. I mean, basically, because the thing with silent film, it's not a realistic medium because there's no sound.
Yeah.
So you're creating some kind of soundscape. It's happening, and a lot of the time you're reflecting the emotions of the characters.
Yeah.
Other times you may be playing the scenery.
Yeah.
Other times you may be doing all sorts of different things. I mean, there's a whole and often you get this thing because silent films always had live music basically.
Yeah.
You often get you'll often get scenes of people playing music in silent films on screen. So it's called diegetic music, where you're doing music which reflects what is actually happening in the film, like the sort of music.
Yeah.
I mean, really annoyingly, dance scenes in films are an absolute nightmare, particularly if you haven't seen the film, because they'll normally have a sort of, you have this 1920s scene, you'll have people dancing somewhere, and you're thinking, now, is this a kind of salon orchestra or is it hot jazz?
Yeah.
And they don't show you the band, first of all. They just show you the dancing. So you make a decision. As soon as you've made the decision, you cut to see the band, and whichever decision you've made is the wrong one.
Oh, my God.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it's, you're doing many different things in a silent film. And each silent film is very different. I mean... one thing, when I started playing for silent film, I thought silent film consisted of German expressionism, the sort of Russian, Eisenstein, Battleship Potemkin sort of stuff, or slapstick. But actually, film spread as quickly as the internet. 2 years after film was first shown in 1895, people were filming in an island off the coast of Papua New Guinea. Yeah. And also recording on wax cylinders the sound of people were making then as well. So it was all around the world and in every genre you can imagine. And it's a bit a whole world of discovery, and things are still turning up, or being restored. Yeah. So it's a fantastic world of discovery for me.
So you said typically you might get to see the film the day before.
Well, now we'll often get sent a screener, or I can see it on YouTube or somewhere, or something like that.
And then as soon as you watch it, what are you thinking about? What happens between you seeing it and then you playing for it?
Well, this is where it gets tricky, actually. If I try and work out, if I sit down at the piano, if I do sit down and try and play the film at the piano, I want to do it quite a long time before I have to do the screening. Yeah. Or else I'm in the situation when I do the screening, nothing is coming, but I'm thinking, what I did yesterday worked fine, but I can't remember it. Yeah. But it actually gives you useful playing through, because then you find awkward corners or situations where it's difficult to transition from one scene to another, or whatever, or catching the mood or the rhythm of the film. The most crucial thing ultimately is it's kind of... I remember hearing a talk by the great sound film composer Elmer Bernstein, where he said, you've got to discover the heartbeat of the film. Yeah. And it's hard to define what that is, but when you found it, you know it, and the film then just sort of flows. I mean, of course, good films generally are much easier to play for than bad films because they work. And you can get emotionally involved in them. If you're getting a strong feeling off the film, it always helps. Yeah.
Do you ever take notes in or make notes of episodes in the scene or the structure of the film?
I try and look at it and try and remember how things go, and maybe think, rather than playing, but think about how I might approach it. And then often on the day, I will just sit at the piano without the film, but improvise in the musical language which I imagine using in the film. So I'm kind of, my brain is sort of used to how those sort of progressions would work.
Almost like your musical warm-up.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm kind of getting into the feeling of it, but not trying to do anything particularly to the film.
Preparing yourself.
Yeah.
And when you're playing for a film, do you find it easy to just quickly change the style you're playing in or the mood? Like when the scene immediately changes, or the character
you're smashing
changes.
it out for like a running scene, and then suddenly it's two people sitting having a coffee or something.
Well, yeah, if you don't know the film, but I remember playing for a film. Was it Lazy Bones or Zaja? I think it might have been. Anyway, basically the first sort of... I didn't know anything about this film, so I was playing for it. First 30 or so minutes of the film. They're all sitting on the back porch somewhere in southern America, South USA, and it's all very kind of laid back. Then suddenly, without any warning, you're in the trenches in the First World War, and, being bombarded. And I had got so lulled into the sense of I found that very tricky. But hopefully with experience you get better at dealing with things. And of course, as I say, now it's less common that you either don't see the film or don't know anything about it.
How long are the films typically?
Most films sort of similar length to today, though you can get films up to 3 hours long. And the 3 hour films can be quite tiring. Because
say 3 hours?
Yeah.
No S word. Yeah, that's tiring.
Well, actually, you can't. When I first started playing for films, I thought I was going to die from exhaustion, but you work out how to deal with it.
3 hours.
Yeah, but the only problem with the 3 hour films is they tend to be big epics. So the last sort of 20 minutes normally tends to be some kind of battle scene or something
that's
like
where
that.
you've really got to smash the living bejesus.
But you've got to. The other thing is you learn as you do it that often less is more. This tendency. It's the same in dance classes. When things aren't working, it's very easy to think, if I just play some more notes, it's going to be better.
It'll make it better,
And it's really what you need to do is pare it down to the simplest possible thing.
Yeah.
And it's the same with films. Like a lot of the time, for a lot of films, you don't need to do so much. So that there's then a contrast, so there's a shade. You can't have a light and shade if you do everything like full out all the time. And it's exactly the same as dance. That is where there's a similarity with dance class, One thing I think I do, which I think is more than most people, is I think about a dynamic shape to an exercise. And almost if I'm playing for an exercise which goes on for any length of time, story's the wrong word because I'm not thinking of characters, but I'm thinking of it as if it was a story, if you know what I mean. Actually I'm making a shape. I don't know how much it helps dancers, but for me it means that I can actually think of, say, a travelling step which goes on for, say, 5, maybe 10 minutes going across the floor. I can actually have some kind of feeling, and I'm not just doing the same stuff over again. It's going somewhere, and then maybe it's dropping down again and coming back and all that sort of thing.
It's quite handy when the classes that you play for, because they're always so busy. So there's multiple groups from the corner, and you just hear the development of your improvisations.
I find it so much easier to play for big classes because often, as I say, often I'm starting with an exercise and I've got no idea what I'm going to do, and it normally takes me often a minute. I think, this is the idea which I should have or develop. It's when things are really short. Particularly if you're just doing like little jumps for 16 counts.
Yeah,
what
you
can
can't
you do?
No, I know. Have you ever tried to notate your improvisations?
No, I haven't. Some other people have, though, which amazed me. I thought, haven't they got anything better to do with their life?
I'm so glad Akiko isn't here. Because she's like, no, I can do it instantly. I've got perfect pitch.
Well, that would be fine. But I just thought, it's a lot of work. And no, I've not ever tried to write anything down which I play for dance classes. It's really weird. I've done a few scores for silent films. One big one was for a film starring Anna Pavlova, actually, her only feature film she ever made, Dumb Girl of Portici. And that had to be completely notated because it was about for 4 instruments.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just found the process of writing is so different from the process of improvising.
Yeah.
And I found it a real struggle. It's just a completely different mindset. And I'm just not suited to that writing.
I think you've got to have a certain frame of mind or a certain way of working for that to work.
I haven't found a way of feeling natural to me. Maybe because I improvise all the time.
You can follow the podcast team by visiting the social media channels. Search for Ballet Piano Podcast on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter for up-to-date information and content about the podcast.
So this actually leads on from what we were just talking about, because you do actually have a couple of ballet albums out, don't you?
Oh God, yeah, I hate them all.
Do you?
Really? And maybe it's vanity because,
when were they made?
Ages ago.
Okay.
I did one with Brian Loftus in the 1990s in a studio, And then I did 3 when me and Cyrus Gabrish had this idea of setting up this website for people to buy ballet music, because everybody said, oh yes, we'll buy CDs, and then nobody did. I mean, partly because at that point I think everybody had decided, like they still do, music should be free, which is a bit of a drag for musicians. But those ones I recorded in, well, it's a little room which Cyrus had, and I recorded myself. And it was such a very different situation from being in a dance studio with a teacher and with people, the energy of the room, and also the acoustic, of course, because I'm so used to playing in a very friendly acoustic as opposed to a dry sort of studio one.
Yeah, that's true.
And I just found it very hard to get anything which, I mean, the old thing, I think are all right, but most of it I just felt hasn't got any life. And I don't think I'm just being vain and thinking, I don't sound like that, do I? You know, because I don't think I do a lot of the time. I think, I mean, the other thing is, of course, that, you know, you get very bothered about wrong notes and all that sort of stuff on a recording, whereas in the class it doesn't really matter. So there is a degree of that happening in the recording. You think of, well, this take has got some life to it, but actually that went wrong there. But this take, actually nothing went wrong, but it's bloody boring. And it's just...
And that's the thing, because it's in the studio, it's live, it happens, and that's it. And if you smash something out that's an absolute clanger, it doesn't really matter, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you go, sorry, and then everybody gets on with it. That's it. You know, it doesn't matter. But recordings I'm crap at recording. I'm awful at recording.
I mean, I have a feeling now that I would probably be better at it, but I actually have no interest in doing it anymore. I don't, you know, at the time I thought, well, this could be first of all a useful earner, and it'd be quite enough people to ask for stuff, and it would be quite useful. But I don't have a desire to do it anymore. I just want to play live. It's just, and actually, you know, you end up recording far more than you end up putting on the CD, and you're actually listening to yourself over and over again. It's just so
awful. It's like listening to yourself back talking. I don't know if anybody else has. It's like I couldn't listen to myself talking for 30 odd years. It's only doing this podcast. Having to listen to my own voice, I just like, all right, you've got to suck it up. But then I hate listening to myself playing the piano. I don't like it.
I mean, the only way of doing the recording, I think, is to have someone you really trust, who you do all the recording. You say, here you are. You sort it out and decide what's any good. And don't bother me about it at all.
Send me a check.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably bank transfer now, isn't it? Not a check.
Because when you're...
It's certainly not cash anymore, is it? Gosh, I miss the old days.
Oh, yeah. Because when you're recording, like you say, you're feeding off of the dancers and the teachers in a live thing.
You know what you're playing for. You know, even if it's something as simple as a bat montante, you know... You are influenced by what you're seeing in front of you. If you're sitting just staring at a piano, I'm thinking, why am I playing this thing in 4/4? I'm not playing this. You know, I think I've always, you know, when I was a teenager, I had dreams of being a great composer and all this kind of stuff. But then I realised actually I haven't got anything to say in itself, which I felt, you know, there's a lot of music in the world. I don't really feel like I needed to add to it, but I do feel that in terms of being in relation with another art form, whether it's dance or whether it's film, I have something to say then. There's a conversation. Yeah. It's not just me talking, it's me in conversation with movement or a film, you know. And that's
it's that symbiotic relationship. We said it a couple of weeks ago when we were chatting with Rose Alice. It's like music and dance, it's a symbiotic relationship. When it comes together, it's brilliant because it's the buzz, it's the excitement of that live thing that's happening that is probably never going to happen again.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing. That's one of the things I also love about it is, and you know, Ditto was playing for silent films, that you were either there that night. There's a preciousness. It's almost like the Japanese thing with the cherry blossoms.
If you're not there for cherry blossom, you've missed it. Yeah, and I was meant to be back in Japan in 2020 2020 for a cherry blossom. We had it booked. It's 2022 now, and we've still not got there. We'll get there eventually.
You will. Yeah.
Maybe by the time Baby Hazel's 18, we'll get there. You never know.
Can we recently talk about your trip to Norway?
If you want, yeah.
Yeah, how was that?
Oh, that was cool in every sense of the word. I was in Tromsø, right at the top of Norway. And it was also, for me, it was actually very special because I had been to this festival, which is in Tromsø, and it's in the oldest cinema in Norway, which dates from 1916.
Yeah.
Beautiful old cinema.
Yeah.
And Tromsø is the most magical place. I had been there in 2018 and 2019, and of course I was going to go in 2020, and it was cancelled.
Yeah.
And then last year they did the festival, but it was socially distanced, and they just used musicians from Norway because they didn't want anyone coming in.
Yeah.
And I thought, about 2 months ago, I still hadn't heard from them. So I thought, well, that's it. It was lovely. And then they asked me again. And so it was very moving actually going back. And the whole festival was very moving because one of the things they do, it's not, I was the only kind of, if you like, traditional person playing playing the piano for films. They had various bands playing, and they always choose their musicians very, very well for the films, I think. And they had, what was particularly moving was they always have relationships with nearby countries. So this year they had 2 Ukrainian musicians who came and played for this film, which is basically a day in the life of Kiev in 1926.
Wow.
And they'd flown out. They had lived in Odessa, and in the war started, they moved to Kiev, and they'd flown out. And then they also had 2 Russian musicians who were playing. It was the day after I left their film. Their film got postponed because someone was ill, who were playing for a Russian film as well. So it was a whole collection of things, and it's just the most magical place. There's just snow everywhere, and basically Tromsø is an island with this huge bridge going across from Tromsdal, and the landscape is just extraordinary. It's a very special place.
One of those ones where taking a photograph on your iPhone doesn't do any justice.
It really doesn't. It's just a huge landscape. And it was it had been warmer, but when I got there, it started snowing again. So it actually doesn't feel, weirdly, it doesn't feel super cold. I've never been there when there's been any wind.
Right.
So even though it's 0 or -1, and you're wrapped up, of course, it doesn't feel super cold.
It's not cold.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, while we're talking about foreign travels, about Rome? About the piano, I can't remember what it's called, but I want to call it the international collection of geeky dance pianists who all get together in Rome, do a bit, and share stories with each other. Yeah. Because you did it in 2018 with Philip Feeney and Juan Mata, and I did it in 2019 with Arcady from New York, and I've forgotten the name, but somebody else.
Yeah.
I found it the most fun being on that stage.
Can you break down what it is?
Right,
Tell our listeners what actually
so basically
it is.
What it is, it's a conference of ballet musicians, isn't it? So you get together, there's a couple of ballet classes that happen, there's contemporary classes that happen, and you can choose to go and watch either or, and then there's a few lectures that established musicians and sometimes dancers will give about subjects they're particularly fond of. So what I was engaged to do, which I presume is what you were, John, was you go and you'd be part of this piano circus. So these 3 musicians on stage, 2 pianos, 4 dancers, and then the teacher sets the exercise, and then you play what you would play. And you've got anywhere between 10 to 50 musicians who are watching you do what you do.
Whoa.
And I was so excited, and so I got on there, I was like, holy moly, like holy beepwood, I've never had this amount of musicians watch me and judge me and then get ready to ask questions about what we do. But it was so interesting to watch, like being on a stage watching other musicians do what they do as well. I was thinking about like you and Philip Feeney and Juan Mata, all equally amazing musicians, but with such different processes of accompanying. How did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had mixed feelings about the whole thing, in that I felt that the person who was teaching, I mean, we're all dealing with a teacher who we don't know.
Yeah.
So it makes it harder.
That was the one sort of common thing, wasn't it? Like everybody was thrown into this not knowing situation.
And I didn't really feel that the teacher who we worked with really kind of had taken on board what it was all about in a way. And what I was really lucky was that what I was afraid beforehand was that it was going to feel a kind of competitive type thing. Because, someone plays for Badminton, then you play for Badminton. And people say, well, who did you like the best, sort of thing. And actually that was a bit the sort of teacher's sort of attitude about it. But actually because, I know Philip well. I mean, we've, since I was started at the place just a little bit before he did.
Right.
But we've known each other ever since the early 80s, really. And one who I didn't know at all, but it was absolutely lovely. And so in terms of us musicians, it didn't feel competitive to do it.
Yeah.
But I did feel it was I guess it was useful. Then I remember I watched, there was also a contemporary one which happened, and I watched that, and I wasn't sure. I thought what was most useful thing was after the thing, I don't know if it was a dancer or a musician who in the audience who started an impassioned thing about what we were doing, and that actually led to a very interesting discussion about, it's slightly like the discussion we're having now about what is music supposed to be doing in a dance class. Because I felt like the teacher was very much like, this is what the music should be, this type of style, and that wasn't what any of us were about.
I found myself trying to go away from what the teacher said in some ways, because like one of the guys was very sort of like the teacher, and there was, so there was very much this accent.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, right, can I do it where you still get the impetus on the out, but you can actually put the accent on the one, and it will still work for the exercise. So not trying to get out like all the stupid greatest hits or anything like that, but just like see what you could do with the exercise. Yeah. And it was a weird experience, but I found it quite, I don't know, in a weird way enjoyable. Then we had a similar thing. Somebody asked something in the audience, and then the whole ballet class stopped. We ended up on sort of like a 20-minute discussion in this small studio theatre about, the reasoning for why you'd just done something. It's like, well, I don't know if there is a reason for why I just did what I did. And he said, like, why did you do that? I was like, the only answer I could come up with was because it was right at that time, because it worked at that moment, and that's what I thought would support the best. Yeah.
Or because you thought it'd be too boring to do what the which is also a valid reason. It's like, or else it does become, like we were saying before, it's something that then becomes, for dancers don't hear it because it's just so it's always the same.
And a one, or a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4.
Just before we finish, we've got some quick fire questions for you that we're asking everybody that's doing In Conversation. Number 1, what is your absolute career highlight?
In terms of playing for dance?
Or the film, or as a musician?
I really can't say at all.
Anything that just that you remember that you particularly loved, or
I think one thing, certainly in terms of, well, actually this is connected with dance as well. In terms of film, but one thing which I know a lot of people loved, and I felt very satisfied that I'd done a decent job. In 1900, for the Paris Exposition, a program was put together called Phono Cinema Théâtre, which is a whole series of films of everybody who was anybody on the Paris stage. Sarah Bernhardt, Little Titch, some of the famous ballerinas, Rosita Mauri, I can't remember all the other names, Claire de Merode, all these people, and some of the film, and also singing.
Yeah.
And they recorded the singer, they recorded the voice on wax cylinders. Yeah. And so it was supposed to be shown with the film. And it was all this music by people you'd never heard, or most of it anyway. Yeah. And I put the music together, and it included me accompanying a singer from 120 years ago on the piano. And of course, they don't sing in time. Yeah. And so on. And it's an extraordinary program. Bizarrely, it's never come to London. We did it in Italy at the festival I pay for in Italy, and it's been done in Paris a couple of times, and in Vilnius and in Birmingham. But we never did it in London. But that actually was very satisfying because it was an extraordinary document. You felt you'd gone back in time.
Wow,
that's incredible.
So
that's
something.
That certainly trumps if you're playing for a musical teacher.
Yeah. And my God, I sweated through it because it was the timing of it was, and it was one piece after the other. It was about 25 piees altogether, and it was just like, and the dance was very hard because again they're not dancing in time.
Yeah.
But it worked. It worked. And people were blown away by it when I first did it. I did it with an accordionist and also a percussionist.
Right.
Frank, as a percussionist, was just amazing. What he can do is just extraordinary.
Wow. Brilliant. Number 2, what advice do you have for your 18-year-old self? Think back to when you were 18.
Well, you see, it's kind of weird because I feel happy with my life. I've had lots of wonderful experiences in the world of dance and also silent film. But if I was 18 and then I'd say do something different. Maybe I would do. I could have imagined a whole other life where before I left New Zealand, I was doing a lot of accompanying singers and instrumentalists. And then when I came to England, I realised that in New Zealand, I knew people from university and all that sort of stuff. When I came to England, there's a whole network of people who've all been through the Royal College or whatever, and they know each other. I had no connections with anyone in the musical world in this country, and so I didn't do any of that here.
Yeah.
And I could imagine having a life where I did a lot of that and played real music.
Yeah.
Real music.
This leads on nicely to the next question. If you weren't a dance pianist and silent film accompanist, what would you have been?
In music, you mean? Or
any other career in life?
I think I could have been... It was interesting doing, the stuff for Phono Cinema Teatro involved a lot of research, going into the British Library and sort of tracking stuff down, and it wasn't easy. And I really got into being a researcher, actually doing that. And I can imagine doing that in a whole lot of other fields, not necessarily music.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe music as well, but I found it was fascinating, and I was quite good at. Often you'd had to get clues from something. You'd read something. For example, the music for the Little Titch dance. I knew that there'd been a music composed. And I remember sitting in the British Library reading Little Titch's autobiography. And when I got to about page 150, he talked about what the music was for his dance, his Big Boots dance. Yeah. And I just almost shouted, I didn't because it was British Library and you had to be silent, but I almost shouted, hallelujah, and then I found the music for it online, and it was from some French antiquarian bookseller who I was able to order the music from and things like that.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It was that's kind of deeply satisfying, all that sort of stuff, I find.
Yeah. This is an easy one, the next one. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Toast.
I was right. I asked about this. We were walking my dog earlier before you came over. And I was like, what do you think John had for breakfast? I'm going to guess it was toast.
Good staple, good breakfast. And the last question, if you win the lottery tomorrow, what's the first thing you're doing?
First thing I'm doing was, there's this amazing building which not many people know about in London called the Cinema Museum, which is in Kennington, which is where we, as a group called the Kennington Bioscope, do a whole series of silent film shows about every 3 weeks and so on and so on. Yeah. And loads of people do lots of other shows there. It's the old workhouse where Chaplin was with his mother. It's the most bizarre private collection of everything to do with... there are rooms full of usherettes' uniforms, posters everywhere. And there's a space where we do it. It's the most amazing space. That whole site got bought by a property developer a few years ago.
Yeah.
So the museum's future has been very much in doubt. But just over the last couple of weeks, the property developer has agreed, and it's all signed and sealed, to sell the site anytime over the next 4 years, sell the site to the Cinema Museum for £1 million. Once the Cinema Museum buys their bit of the site, because it's a huge site, there's other bits as well, but they always get their bit. It's all the building's in terrible state of repair. They'll need to raise money as well. But I would give them £1 million to start with, assuming I'd given a few million.
Yes, of course.
You won big on the lottery.
Yeah, you won the Euro million.
So I saw someone won 184 million.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's the first thing I would do, because I know it's like a bit of, and I recommend everybody to go there and go and see shows there, because it's an amazing space, and it's like a bit of old London before all the property developers have actually knocked everything down, and it's just wonderful that it may have a chance to survive. So that's what I would do.
Fantastic.
On that note,
yeah.
Thank you so much
for
joining us,
John.
Mr. John Sweeney.